Ryan here for Encore. I hope that you have all enjoyed the holidays, and as the season comes to a close, I'd like to squeeze in a quick episode for this SCX24 Mini Cooper that I built in April 2024. So, this version you're seeing now is in between two phases of builds, meaning I've started changing some parts of the initial build, but more changes are about to happen. So I just want to document this before I make any further modifications, and that's why this episode is just the first part. Part 2 will come after I've completed the next upgrades. Just for context, as if it's not obvious enough, I just want to say that this build is not intended to be a high-performance rig. It's built for fun, and that's exactly what it has accomplished. While everyone seems to be building an extra-long SCX24 nowadays, I find it equally interesting to build an extra-short one. This Mini Cooper is like a never-ending side project for me. It started out very raw and simple, but it has been in a constant build, test, learn process where I continuously explore how to improve the performance incrementally. The little better it gets, the little more fun it becomes. For the build review, let's take a quick look at the wheelbase and chassis, tires and shocks, electronics, bodyworks, and the next phase of upgrades. The idea of putting together this build came when I was exploring what I can do with the stock SCX24 parts and other spare parts I had from upgrading my C10 and deadbolt. When I converted both rigs to C-bolt wheelbase, I had spare links and drive shafts that I can play around with. That was when I learned that deadbolt fronts with C10 rears equals 123mm wheelbase, and I thought this was good for mounting a Mini Z body. Then I started looking for other small bodies that I can use, and stumbled upon a 124 die-cast Mini Cooper model. But it's smaller than a Mini Z body based on the measurements, and I needed a shorter wheelbase. So I paired deadbolt fronts with C10 fronts to make the wheelbase 114mm. Then I shortened the stock SCX24 chassis and moved the rear shock mounts forward for a quick mock-up. This was how it looked like back then. When I received the die-cast model, it was a little smaller than expected, so I needed an even shorter wheelbase. That's how I ended up using all deadbolt fronts for a 104mm wheelbase, or 4.1 inches. The position of the rear shocks on the shortened stock chassis for the 104mm wheelbase was awkward, so I ordered an Encore LCG chassis and shortened it, and that's the chassis of the initial build, and I haven't changed that yet. What's different between the original build and this current build state are the tires, shocks, and links. I switched the links from 104mm to 114mm to see if there are performance gains, but there's honestly not much of a difference at this point. The 104mm wheelbase looks better on the body actually, so I may or may not revert to the original wheelbase moving forward. The tires on the original build were these 46mm tires I used previously for my Mini Z Jimny. Then I changed it with these 48mm RC4WD tires stuffed with 3D printed inserts from Sticky Wheels. The inserts were tuned specifically for this set of tires since they're very small. For the shocks, I used these telescopic shocks for a lower ride height, but I limited the travel by putting a stopper on the piston rod from the inside. Too much travel will make the rig tip over easily since the build is top heavy. Then recently, I replaced the shocks with 40mm Encore big bore to carry the die-cast body better, and also to add a little more ride height since the tires got bigger. The electronics from the original build are still here. So we have this Encore motor and this servo that I both used on my deadbolt. The servo is mounted on a Mofo RC adjustable servo mount, then pushed back to the end slot in order to fit within the body. The battery and ESC receiver are from my stock SCX24 Power Wagon. This is the only battery I had at that time that can fit into the build, so I used it with the ESC receiver to save space instead of fitting in an ESC and a receiver separately. The battery tray is made from a plastic food container. Then I mounted it on a Mofo RC aluminum cross brace that comes with 2 threaded holes on the bar. I find this cross brace very useful and I've used it on my other builds too. The ESC is glued to this tray that was cut from this part of the stock battery tray and then bolted onto the chassis rail just like in a stock SCX24. For the body, this die-cast model took some work in order to mount it onto the LCG chassis. First, I had to remove the door and hood hinges, the interior door panels, and all other unnecessary parts to make room. Then I glued everything back directly to the body, including the windows and the roof. I made the front magnetic mount using the battery tray that came with the chassis, while the hinge rear mounts were made from the stock front bumper mount of deadbolt that I split into half. I had to trim this part of the body behind the front bumper to make some space for the servo horn. Then, I trimmed the bumper and fenders a little bit for steering clearance. For the next phase of improvements, I'm going to try this Coop RC chassis. I got the 3D printed version, so it will be easy for me to modify the chassis. I need to shorten it from both ends, like I did with the Endura chassis. Hopefully, I won't need to drill some holes for the correct shock position because it has enough mounting holes already. It has a 12.5 degree skid angle, and I still don't know how that's gonna work for this setup. But if it works, then maybe I'll upgrade it to the aluminum version. I also have these brass steering knuckles from TiTs RC that come with tungsten slugs. These are 15 grams a piece with the bearings and hardware. I'm hoping to add some unsprung front weight with this because the weight is concentrated on the top center. My axles are stock because I need them to be in stock with, and I think these knuckles might be helpful. This Mofo RC torque beast motor is previously from my deadbolt. I absolutely love this brushed motor, especially when paired with the Lizard Pro. I know there are other good ESCs out there, but I'm trying to keep the cost down, so I'm gonna use this for now. I'm not sure if I can fit a brushless motor later on because the motor mount will take up space, but at least this Lizard Pro will make the build brushless ready. And since I won't have a lot of space left, I'll be using this tiny receiver that I found from Dumbo RC to see if it's any good. Lastly, since I won't be using the stock SCX24 ESC receiver anymore, I don't need to stick to this battery. I'll see if the same battery I used for the Model T can slide into the remaining space. So that's it for this episode. I'll be doing a part 2 once I've completed the upgrades and test crawl. The build might take some time since it involves changing the chassis and electronics layout and then remounting the body again to the new build. For the next build breakdown, we'll be looking into another Mini Cooper, but this time it will be in the 18th scale. I wish all of you a happy and prosperous year. Thanks for watching and keep rocking!